Bending Spoon reached an implicit valuation of 4.9 billion. Let's break it down piece by piece. Today we really want to go deeper into the details and see exactly who are the player and what is their role. It's been, in a path of acquisition for the past couple of years. The big news that actually came up, it was the fact that Barry Gifford himself wrote up the investment in Bending Spoon up by 89%.
The increase in implicit valuation of Bending Spoon by 2.3 billion is like a couple of Italian ecosystems in size.
Right, a lot of things have been going on, but let's maybe start talking about the elephant in the room, Bending Spoon. What do you think, Nick? It's a must. We need to start there, right?
Yeah, I know. Just a couple of news from last week that really need more attention. So go ahead.
All right. So Bending Spoon reached an implicit valuation of 4.9 billion. Let's break it down piece by piece. Today we really want to go deeper into the details and see exactly who are the player and what is their role. And I think it can be very useful to actually give a better overview of what's going on in the market, because beside the hype, I think there is some very interesting insights, but at the same time, some questions that can be raised actually for this. So let's dive into that. So of course, the big player is Bending Spoon. Everybody loves him. One of the big star in Italy, and it's been in a path of acquisition for the past couple of years. As we mentioned last week, one of the last acquisition was a startup from Germany. Very interesting. And that's just one of the players, actually. Let's also talk about the other two, which one, of course, is Barry Gifford. So Barry Gifford is a private equity firm based in the UK with about 226 billion of assets under management. They have a strategy for investment. So they not only invest in tech, but they have different kind of funds and different strategic outlooks. What is interesting is that the big news that actually came up, it was the fact that actually Barry Gifford himself wrote up the investment in Bending Spoon up by 89%. As, of course, Bending Spoon is raising further funding for other acquisitions in the future. So the original implicit valuation was about 2.6 billion in February 2024. And thanks to this write-up, essentially, Bending Spoon gets to a valuation of 4.9. Making Bending Spoon actually the second largest holding in Barry Gifford fund, which is about 8.1% of its full portfolio. So, Nick, that's the news. I mean, so we're not talking about valuation itself. We're talking about actually a write-up. So it's slightly different, I would say. That's why I said implicit. I don't know if it's the right word, but it's kind of a derived sort of valuation in a sense. And that's how Bending Spoon got this high multiple in a sense. What is your take so far? Yeah.
No, it's super interesting. It's numbers on paper, so nothing really material in some sense. Even though that says a lot about the goals and feelings of Barry Gifford related to their holding in Bending Spoons. I was just thinking, again, it's not apple with apples, but if the increase in implicit valuation of Bending Spoons by 2.3 billion is like a couple of Italian ecosystems in size. That's money raised. This is just implicit valuation, but still, to give you a sense of the size of the numbers, it's twice as much money as they raised in Italy last year, almost.
Like in the full ecosystem, in the full Italian ecosystem. So
again, wow, it's just evaluation, not money, but still.
No, still is massive. Still definitely is massive. And actually, I mean, what can we derive from that? Either that really Bending Spoon is really on this growth path, which is massive, or that the Italian ecosystem is still really in its infancy, and it's in the last years, unfortunately, it has a hard time kind of breaking out of that path. Actually, I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe
well, a bit of both.
a bit of both. Yeah.
A bit of both.
All right, let's also talk about the second big player, which I think it's not too it definitely played a part, I think, in this big like valuation problem, which is Silver Point Capital. So Silver Point Capital provided basically money for Bending Spoon to accomplish a few of the acquisition. So Silver Point Capital is a global credit investing firm based in the US. They have about 32 billion under management. And if we break it down, the direct lending practice is about 16 billion in asset under management, which basically they provide customized solution for big corporation to allow for M&A projects. So they specialize in this kind of stuff. So very interesting player. It's a debt provider, so it's not a private equity firm, which is essential. And this gets to, I think, the first relevant point, which is how cool is the fact that Bending Spoon is working with both like a PE operator and a lending operator. So they can basically, they're getting capital from the best with the best instrument out there, I would say. So definitely like double like level strategy, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, super.
Let's maybe dig deeper about the dynamics of a write-up. So basically, in general, as Nick, you already like started mentioning, so it's basically on paper. So essentially, for the listener, write-up just means the increase in book value of an asset or an investment in this case, which basically it's done to reflect the fair market value. So there is this concept of fair market value, which we can basically talk about it like for hours, which is essentially saying, okay, an asset price today, what would be its actual value as of today, just to completely like dumb it down. And I apologize for the people that already know this stuff, but I think is relevant to actually make it clear. And of course, the idea is that PE firms, PE firms write up their holding value typically after an acquisition. So it's a very much typical in PE land when actually acquisition of this sort happens. So it's common. The degree to which they write up, then it's debatable. There are like different levels for sure. What is interesting, which has been mentioned in the article from Sifted, is the fact that the write-up was actually bigger than the write-up that Baillie Gifford did for both SpaceX, because they also invested in SpaceX and it's part of the portfolio, and ByteDance. So in terms of, in absolute terms, Bending Spoon is the biggest write-up they had so far, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I read the same.
So, where do we go from there? I mean, why such a big write-up? So I think there are like a few elements to consider here, and I'm very curious, Nick, what you think about it, is the fact that, okay, so big write-ups might refer, well, for sure there are different variables affecting how the write-up works. So there is not only one causal factor, there are probably multiple. So let's try to uncover a few of them. So one first element, which obviously come into mind, is the aggressive strategic acquisition path. So does this has a weight on the value of the company, in terms of, how the company value can grow. So does this specific strategy, which have been seen unfolding in the past year, has a role in this like big valuation? What's your intuition on this?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. So, I mean, I'm not fully aware of the multiples, the ways that, this valuation is coming together. It is true that for sure a big component of this valuation is, it is a technology company. Technology companies command higher multiples nowadays. It's on an acquisition spree, so meaning one additional euro of value from an acquired company transforms into more than €1 of value in the acquirer. So there are some effects there. It is true that in some sense, companies don't grow in an infinite way. So there is, some kind of plateau that you should expect. So that means that multiples kind of compress as the future expectation, gets closer to some kind of average forecast opportunity. I don't know. But still, there's momentum here, and momentum has a value. They've been acquiring, they've been growing, they've been signaling a lot. So the valuation game is also about signals. This is a signal, so this is
It's a great point.
part it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So it's anchored in some fundamental value, but still, it's you're communicating to the world some kind of message, and that's valuable for the next steps.
Love that. I think I like the framing of the signal part, which is less quantitative, but definitely like captured in terms of valuation. So that's super interesting. Yeah, awesome. So the other big part is the debt leverage. So we've seen a lot of money pouring into Bending Spoon for the acquisition, but in terms of debt. So that's I don't know how debatable that is, because on one side one can argue that the high leverage of the company might actually be a liability in the future. So that's one argument. But on the other side, that might not be necessarily the case. So just having a lot of debt for acquisition, does it impact the valuation? Does it necessarily impact it for on the positive side or not?
Well, we're in a different world, right? So if you take the lens of a startup, over debt is a burden. Most times is a burden. This is instead something different. It's more similar to private equity. Your debt is a way to optimize the capital structure. That means that actually it can make equity more valuable, or the expected rate of return on equity, better for investors, because debt is cheaper in some sense than
Interesting.
raising, $500 million in equity from another equity investor.
Yeah.
Instead, this is private debt. That's a completely different beast than bank-based debt. So, as you said, Silver Point is a professional firm doing private debt, and that's private credit, private debt are tools that you really use in this way to finance acquisition and do strategic stuff. So this is a different play. So we are in a financial operations optimization game.
Very good point. Yeah, I agree. We're pretty much working on a different dimension in this sense. I mean, we're used to startup valuation, or whatever that means, whatever kind of methods we want to attach to it, to actual I'm pushing it and say old school, just because it's already validated private equity methods and techniques for acquisition and value growth for companies. So that's interesting. That's super interesting. And as you were mentioning, the tech component is still there. Probably the multiple effect is still there, but we are seeing a hybrid valuation model in a sense where, the tech components brings multiples, but also the private equity part also has a weight. So how exactly? It's hard for me to I'm thinking of like comparable situation where like a tech company also start acquiring. Okay, big tech in general got there also, from Google to Facebook to all the big techs for sure. But yeah, it's very interesting to see it evolving from scratch. So that's very, very interesting for sure.
Yeah. Well, if you have a quick comparable, and you could, dedicate a full episode on that. So Bain Capital acquired a controlling stake in Amiral, valuing the company 1.1 billion. And that's, kind of a similar game, not exactly the same. This is pure play private equity, so taking a majority stake from the hands of one fund to the hands of another bigger fund. Also much standard, but Namirial is still a technology company offering software services, and probably there are similar dynamics there.
Awesome, great.
Not as Bending Spoons. Bending Spoons is, kind of, it looks like more dynamic, more scaling up-ish, but still similar dynamic.
Love it. No, that's a good insight. That's awesome insight, and I think it definitely there is a role there too that has been played. All right, let's also not forget about organic growth though, because Bending Spoon as a company is growing itself. So, I mean, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2023, Bending Spoon had a revenue of about 400 million, and it's expected to grow about 500 million in 2024. So, not yet completely disclosed, but definitely there is a growth path. So we didn't hit yet the plateau as a company, and it's still growing. So again, another push toward is like massive valuation increase. So I'm sure that the organic part of growth had like I don't want to say like a primary role, but definitely one of the big roles in terms of what's going on with the valuation.
Well, so the bullish view is that, I mean, there are consumer software companies that grew in the $1 trillion valuation, Meta and stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of room to grow still. So,
Good point.
bullish
Yeah. Oh,
view.
for sure. Awesome. Let's finish with more like on operational side. So they demonstrated a strong operational capabilities in integrating business, and I think also that definitely plays a role. We've seen that before, where companies has been like optimized. Of course, there has been like layoffs. Operation have been like try to integrate inside the company, but the playbook is working from the investor standpoint. The playbook is definitely working. So also that kind of expertise is definitely like something valuable that brought weight into this valuation. All right. So Nick, let me end up with a twist about this, and then we pass to the next news. So if I was trying to research about the literature on how exactly write-ups typically work in private equity, and a few of the authors were mentioning on how big write-ups actually happen right before an exit event. So is Gifford trying to sell the position? So the idea is that right down, you kind of want to integrate them like, at the really beginning of the life of the fund. Write-ups, you kind of want to delay them a little bit until you actually are ready to kind of, have an exit event and, liquidate and, sell the position. So I don't know, I'm just calling it. Let's see what's going to happen.
Okay. Nice.
All right. So on that note, let's also talk about one big round from last week. Let's talk about CamGraPhIC Srl, photonics startup raising 25 million in a Series A round from CDP Venture Capital, NATO Innovation Fund, Sony Joint Capital, Bosch Ventures, and Indaco Ventures. Awesome round, big round, definitely a lot of great players. I think CDP also is kind of deploying from the large venture fund, which is basically specializing on larger tech, especially in deep tech projects. So very, very interesting. We've seen a few of those. And definitely an interesting element. Also on another level, I would say. So they're developing like graphene-based devices for high data transfer, which actually ties into everything that is happening in AI, apparently. I mean, well, of course, we need more like faster speeds, and we will need more faster speeds. So this is like a very interesting and strategic investment in the AI infrastructure. What's your sensation on this one?
Well, my point here is the odd one out, NATO Innovation Fund. That means that, we have some potential, next to dual use cases here. So this is interesting. So I think we might see that fund doing more deals in the future. I think this is the most interesting bit in this syndicate.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, NATO, has been active since last year or a couple of years, 2 years, yeah. And I mean, definitely was a big news at the time, definitely interesting, and definitely like atypical for the ecosystem. So, but glad to see that they're deploying for sure. All right. So we also seen some movement from one of the new entrants, which is the Italian Funders Fund. So Nick, if you wanna give us like a little bit of an overview on what happened.
No, just shout out to the Italian Funders Fund. They are on the investment spree. They're on fire, and they announced two different operations this week, Cassandra and Compre, to seed pre-seed rounds in the Martech AI space. Super interesting. I know they're investing a lot, so excellent signal on the ecosystem.
Absolutely. So definitely a very strong model where former founders are supporting like new founders, and a very promising project. And it's been working a lot in the other ecosystem, and they're really doing a great job in like pushing this also in the Italian ecosystem. So definitely, talking again about the value of the network and the network centrality. I mean, that's the thesis, man. That's what it is, and it works. So very excited to see. Yeah,
totally agreed.
Right, Nick, thank you so much for joining. This brings us to an end for this week's episode, and I'll see you next week.